The polar winds recording is a real favourite of mine because it's actually recorded at the North Pole. That's the sound of the North Pole. What happens is, I was there about 3 o'clock in the morning, but of course time's irrelevant there. It's permanently daylight and the sun just circles overhead between April and September. I'm on the surface of a frozen ocean because the North Pole is sea level and it's seawater, but it's frozen solid. What happens is, in the high winds that scour the surface is very rough. It scours off ice crystals, tiny shards, which are called spindrift, and then that bowls across the surface of the frozen sea, and that's what creates the sound, that tearing, very freezing, polar-like sound. That's where it comes from. It's a unique landscape, it's a unique icescape, and the soundscape is consequently unique. There's nowhere else sounds like that. The South Pole's different because that's ice on top of a landmass, so it's a real characteristic sound of the place. The ice holes recording was made again in Iceland on the Vatnajökull glacier in summer, in June this time. And what happens on the surface of the glacier is that on warm, sunny days, obviously the surface in summer tends to start to melt. So the altitude is quite high, so you get a lot of bright sunshine in June, cloudless skies. And the ice softens, starts to melt. And what I discovered totally by chance, that these weird ice shapes would start to sag and there'd be holes blown in them by the wind. And then at night they would refreeze. So first thing in the morning when they were still frozen solid, when the wind blew through them, it was like an Aeolian harp. So I placed some tiny personal microphones by the edges of these holes. So what you're hearing is quite a micro sound, but amplified as the wind tears across this sharp-edged surface of ice, and the tiny mics on the leeward side of the ice. So you hear this, it's like blowing across the top of a bottle, but created by the wind blowing through a hole in some ice rather than glass. The Acacia wind track was recorded in the Kalahari Desert, South Africa. As is, there's a sand dune track as well, haven't you, as well, which is recorded in the same place. The wind, anywhere in the world, only makes a sound when it hits something. And it will tear across the surface of the Kalahari Desert, blowing inland from the South Atlantic. And it really doesn't make much sound until it hits something. What I did with the Acacia wind track was put microphones and contact microphones in the crown of a dead acacia tree on the edge of the Cusep River, and I put some contact mics, because it was covered in fissures and cracks, some contact mics inside some of the dried up branches, but also put my tiny DPA personal mics in the crown of the tree, so when the wind catches the woodwork, again, it blows through it. It sounds like some natural wind instrument because it catches all the eddies and the cracks in the tree. So it whistles and blows through. And it also has this beautiful sort of low moaning tone to it. It's incredible, 44 degrees centigrade when we made that recording. Quite a difficult place to work. And then towards sunset, the winds changed and came back out of the desert, back out to sea. And so I buried some hydrophones, again, using them as geophones, in the base of a sand dune just a few centimetres below the surface, and recorded the sound of the wind tearing across the surface of the sand, and it's picking up individual grains and carrying along the surface. I mean, bizarrely, it's rather like recording spindrift at the North Pole, but at the North Pole it was ice crystals, and in the Kalahari Desert it's sand grains running across the surface. The railing recordings were made in Britain at a bizarre place, an ex-top secret military site called Orford Ness, where they used to do all the environmental testing of Britain's nuclear weapons in the 1950s and 60s. And it's now abandoned, and it's part of a shingle spit. It's the longest shingle spit, I can say that, in Europe. It stretches from Aldborough in Suffolk down to Orford Ness. It's about 15 kilometres long. And at the end of this shingle spit is this ex-military establishment called Orford Ness. There's also an American building there called the Cobra Mist building, built for developing over-the-horizon radar, which was an abandoned project. But now the whole military site's abandoned, turned into a nature reserve. The metal railings were recorded on Orford Ness in this old bomb ballistics lookout tower, which is raised up above the surface of the shingle. So it's the highest point, one of the highest points on the island. And so with these tiny microphones, again, in the leeward side of the railings, catching the wind, blowing through this metal structure. So again, it really starts to sing.